Give each of us one child. That's what 3 desperate frontier widows declared to a virgin mountain man in the middle of town. The snow was falling, the church bell still ringing when they placed their children in his hands. Folks thought it was a simple act of mercy. But nothing in this wild country stays simple for long, because the children's father isn't dead. He's alive and outlaw, hunted by the railroad, and he's coming back for his sons. And worse, the law says the mountain man may be guilty just for sheltering them. Now the fire crackles in his lonely cabin, tiny voices calling him Pa, while shadows move at the tree line. Will he protect them with his life, or lose everything to blood ties and railroad greed? The widows gave him their children. But can this solitary man hold on to family, faith, and freedom when the past comes riding out of the dark? When blood, law, and mercy collide on the frontier, who truly deserves to call these children their own? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The snow swirled in thick flurries, dancing in the glow of Ezra's lantern as he made his way through the deepening drifts. His boots crunched with each step, leaving a lonely trail behind him. The wind whistled through the pines, carrying with it the sound of children coughing in the distance. Ezra's heart thumped against his ribs as he approached the wagon parked at the edge of town. The canvas cover snapped in the wind, and beneath it, he could make out the huddled forms of the widows and their charges. His throat tightened. He'd spent years alone in his cabin, content with nothing but the company of wilderness. But those hollow-eyed children at the church steps had stirred something deep. Inside him, something he thought he buried along with his mother years ago. Martha. Wainwright's sharp eyes caught the approaching lantern light first. She emerged from beneath the wagon cover, a wool shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Mr. Holla?" Her voice carried both hope and wariness. "Ma'am." Ezra dipped his head, snow collecting on the brim of his hat. "I've been thinking on what you asked." Clara Dawson appeared next, her gentle face lined with worry. A child's cough punctuated the howling wind, and her hand instinctively reached toward the sound. "The little ones aren't faring well in this cold," she said softly. Ruth Strong remained silent beneath the canvas, but her dark eyes watched him intently, cradling her feverish son against her chest. The lamplight caught the silver threading in her black hair, and something in her steady gaze made Ezra's words catch in his throat. "My cabin," he began, then cleared his throat. "It ain't much, but it's solid. Got a good hearth." He shifted his weight, snow creaking beneath his boots. Could fit 3 young ones comfortable enough. Martha's spine straightened. "You're offering to take them in?" "Yes'm." Ezra's voice grew stronger. "Got an extra room. Clean blankets. Plenty of firewood stacked." He glanced at the children's shadows beneath the canvas. "Reckon they need walls more than I need empty space." Clara's eyes welled with tears. "The Lord provides," she whispered. Reaching for Martha's hand, Ruth emerged from the wagon then, her son bundled against her chest. "You understand what you're offering, Mr. Holly? These children need more than just shelter." Ezra met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "My ma taught me that sometimes the good Lord don't ask if you're ready, just if you're willing." He adjusted his grip on the lantern. "I'm willing." Martha studied him with narrowed eyes. "You've lived alone a long while, Mr. Holly. Taking in children means noise, mess, endless questions." "Yes'm, I reckon it does." A ghost of a smile touched Ezra's lips. "But my ma also taught me that empty rooms make for lonely prayers." The women exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Clara spoke. "We should decide quickly. The storm's getting worse." Ruth nodded, her son coughing against her shoulder. "Which children will you take, Mr. Holly?" Ezra looked at each of the small faces peering out from the wagon. His heart clenched at their mixture of fear and hope. "Whichever ones need me most," he said simply. The next few minutes passed in a flurry of movement. Martha's oldest boy, strong enough to help with chores, was chosen. Clara's young charge, a girl still wearing her dead mother's too large shawl, climbed down with trembling legs. And Ruth's son, burning with fever, was carefully transferred to Ezra's sturdy arms. "I'll fetch the doctor first thing," Ezra promised, adjusting the blanket around the sick child. "Got some willow bark tea at home, might help till then." The three children huddled close to him, their small bodies shivering in the cold. Ruth stepped forward, pressing a small leather pouch into his hand. "Cherokee medicine," she said quietly. "For the fever." Ezra's fingers closed around the pouch, warm from her touch. "Much obliged," he murmured. Martha cleared her throat. "We'll be checking on them, regular-like." "I'd expect nothing less, ma'am." Ezra shifted his lantern. "My door's always open to you all." Clara wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "God bless you, Mr. Hawley." As Ezra turned to lead the children toward his cabin, Ruth's voice stopped him. "Mr. Hurley?" He looked back to find her eyes shining in the lamplight. "Thank you for answering. Our prayers." The weight of the sick child in his arms, the two others pressed against his legs, and the trust in Ruth's eyes settled over Ezra like a mantle. He nodded once, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, then guided his new charges through. The swirling snow toward Home Dot, the pale winter sun crept over the horizon as Ezra and the widows worked to move the children's belongings. His cabin, usually stark and silent, filled with the scrape of trunks and the rustle of blankets being arranged. The rough-hewn table, where he'd eaten alone for so many years, now stood surrounded by borrowed chairs from neighbors that Martha supervised. The placement of each trunk with sharp-eyed attention. "Mind those corners, Mr. Hawley. The wood's liable to scratch." Ezra nodded, carefully maneuvering a heavy chest against the wall. His muscles strained beneath his wool shirt, but he welcomed the work. It kept his mind from spinning with the magnitude of the change he'd invited into his life. Clara folded quilts with practiced hands, creating neat stacks on the spare bunk. Her daughter, Emma, clung to her skirts, watching with wide eyes as her few possessions found new homes in unfamiliar corners. Ruth tended to her son Jacob's fever by the hearth, mixing the Cherokee medicine with warm water. The boy's cough had eased some, but his cheeks still burned red. The oldest boy, Thomas, Martha's son, helped arrange kindling near the fireplace, his movements careful and deliberate. Throughout the morning, neighbors trickled in, bearing extra blankets and cooking pots. Sarah Miller, the mercantile owner's wife, pressed a basket of fresh biscuits into Ezra's hands. "It's a good thing you're doing," she whispered, patting his arm. Reverend Porter arrived with his wife, carrying a box of hand-me-down clothes. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, smiling at the sight of the children. "Sometimes he sends angels in the form of mountain men." Ezra ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise. He'd never sought attention, and now he felt the weight of the town's eyes upon him. As evening approached, Ezra stood over his cast-iron pot, awkwardly ladling beef stew into borrowed bowls. His hands, more accustomed to skinning rabbits and setting traps, felt clumsy with this new task. The children sat at the table, their whispered conversations filling the cabin with unfamiliar life. "Thank you, sir," Thomas said quietly as Ezra placed a bowl before him. The boy's manners, clearly taught by Martha's firm hand, touched something in Ezra's heart. Emma swung her legs beneath the table, her spoon making tiny splashing sounds in her stew. "It smells like Mama's," she offered shyly. Jacob, wrapped in blankets near the fire, managed a few spoonfuls with Ruth's help. His fever had dropped enough for him to show interest in food, which brought relief to everyone's faces. The peaceful moment shattered when heavy boots thundered up the cabin's front steps. The door burst open, letting in a blast of cold air and a red-faced man who clearly come straight from the saloon. "Where's the sheriff?" he demanded, swaying slightly. "Heard tell he'd be here." The children froze, spoons halfway to their mouths. Martha and Clara moved instinctively closer to them. While Ruth drew Jacob into her arms, Doc Sheriff Boone stepped in behind the man, his expression tight. "Take it outside, Miller. This ain't the place." But Miller was already speaking, his words slurred but clear enough. "Them orphans ain't orphans at all. Their pa's Luke Hansen, the same outlaw what shot that railroad agent down in Kansas territory." He jabbed a finger toward the children. "Everyone in the saloon's talking about it. He ain't dead. He's running from the law." The cabin fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Ezra's hand tightened on the ladle, watching as the widows' faces drained of color. Sheriff Boone grabbed Miller's arm. "That's nothing but saloon talk. Now get on out of here before I throw you in jail for disturbing the peace." "But Sheriff, out." Boone's voice cracked like a whip, and Miller stumbled backward through the door. The sheriff turned to the stunned room. "Pay it no mind. Drunk men'll believe anything they hear." But his eyes lingered on the widows, questioning. After the sheriff left, the evening meal resumed in strained silence. The children picked at their food, all earlier chatter extinct. Ezra noticed how they darted glances at each other, speaking volumes without words. When night fell and the widows reluctantly prepared to leave, Ezra assured them the children would be safe. But something had changed in the air, like the pressure. Before a storm, later, as he checked on the children before bed, he paused outside the boys' room. Through the crack in the door, he heard Thomas whispering to Jacob. "Pa said he'd come back for us. He promised." Ezra's blood ran cold. He retreated to the main room, lifting his rifle from its pegs above the fireplace. Settling into his chair, he laid the weapon across his knees and stared into the dying flames. The wind moaned around the cabin's corners, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Ezra knew he wouldn't sleep tonight. He'd opened his door to 3 children in need, but now he wondered what else might have slipped in with them. The morning sun cast long shadows across Silver Bluff's main street as Ezra guided his wagon toward Miller's General Store. His boots crunched on the frozen ground, matching rhythm with the 3 widows' footsteps beside him. The crisp air carried the scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys, mixing with the sweet aroma of fresh bread from the baker's shop. Clara walked close to the wagon, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. Her voice was barely above a whisper. When she spoke, "We ought to tell you the whole truth about Luke Carver, Mr. Holly." Ezra slowed his pace, noting how Martha and Ruth drew nearer, forming a tight circle away from curious ears. 2 years ago, up in Wyoming territory, Clara continued, her eyes fixed on her mittened hands. Luke was working as a ranch hand when trouble came. Railroad men, trying to claim grazing land that wasn't rightly theirs. Words were exchanged. Then shots. She paused, swallowing hard. One agent fell. They said Luke did it, but he swore the man drew first. Martha's voice was bitter as winter wind. Luke wasn't no saint, mind you, quick to anger, especially with drink in him. But he never raised a hand to those boys. "We thought him dead," Ruth added softly, "until 3 weeks ago, when a trader passed through our settlement speaking of a man matching his description, alive and asking about his sons." Ezra stopped walking, his mind racing. "So you fled?" "Had to," Martha said firmly. Luke's temper. It was getting worse before he disappeared. And now, with the law after him, she shook her head. Those boys deserve better than a life on the run. Inside Miller's store, Ezra watched the widows selecting supplies: flour, coffee, dried beans. His thoughts churned like river rapids. The children weren't orphans at all, but sons of an outlaw. By taking them in, He'd stepped into something far deeper than simple charity. "Mr. Hall?" Clara touched his arm gently. "We'd understand if you want no part of this trouble." Ezra squared his shoulders, remembering the trust in the boy's eyes that morning as they'd waved goodbye. "Those children need looking after. Don't reckon it matters much who their pa was." Relief softened Clara's features. "You're a good man." Ezra Halley. The day passed in a blur of chores and settling in tasks. As evening approached, Ezra stood in his dooryard, showing Thomas and Jacob how to split kindling. The rhythmic thunk of the axe punctuated their lesson. "Keep your thumb tucked in, Thomas," he instructed, adjusting the boy's grip. "That's the way. Nice and steady." Martha watched from the porch, a basket of mending in her lap. "You've got a natural way with them," she observed quietly when Ezra stepped back to let the boys practice. "More patience than their own father ever showed." Ezra glanced at her, noting the mix of sadness and hope in her eyes. "Reckon every child deserves patience." "Luke," Martha's needle paused mid-stitch. He tried, in his way, but anger ate at him like rust on iron. These boys need someone steady, someone who can show them a better path. The last rays of sunlight painted the snow golden as Ezra gathered the split wood. The boys had done well, their small pile neat and even. He was about to call them in for supper when something caught his eye, a depression in the snow beneath the cabin's side window. His heart quickened. Boot prints, fresh ones, led away from the window toward the woods. Someone had been standing there, watching. "Get inside," he told the boys, keeping his voice calm. "Your Aunt Martha's got supper waiting." Once they were safely indoors, Ezra retrieved his rifle from its pegs. The Winchester's familiar weight steadied his hands as he followed. The tracks, reading the story they told. A man's prints, deep and purposeful, heading straight for Willow Creek. The creek burbled beneath a thin sheet of ice, its voice muffled by the growing darkness. Ezra's eyes tracked the boot prints to the water's edge, and no further. Whoever had made them knew enough to use the creek to hide their trail. Standing there in the gathering dusk, Ezra felt eyes on him, though the woods stood silent. Luke Carver was no longer just a story told by worried widows. He was real. He was here, and he was watching his sons from the shadows. Ezra chambered around, the metallic click sharp in the winter air. He wouldn't fire first. That wasn't his way. But he'd protect those boys, whether their father approved or not. The wind stirred the bare branches overhead as Ezra made his way back to the cabin. Behind him, somewhere in the darkening forest, a father's longing warred with an outlaw's caution, while ahead, lamplight spilled from windows that now sheltered his sons. Morning light painted Silver Bluff streets in pale gold as townspeople gathered in knots outside the mercantile, their voices hushed but urgent. Ezra noticed how conversations died when he passed, only to resume in fierce whispers once he'd moved on. Them railroad men were here again, old Tom Wheeler told him, leaning on his cane outside the livery. Morton and his bunch, demanding folks. Sign over grazing rights. The elderly man's rheumy eyes darted about. Say they'll make examples of anyone who stands against progress. Inside the general store, Martha and Clara stood frozen by the fabric counter, their faces pale as flour. Railroad agent Morton's voice carried through the thin walls from the street outside. "Anyone harboring Luke Carver or his kin will face consequences," Morton declared to the gathering crowd. "That man's a menace to civilization, and those who shield him are no better." Ezra's jaw tightened as he watched the widows hurry back to the wagon, their purchases forgotten. Ruth's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl closer. "Did you hear?" she whispered. "They mean to punish anyone connected to Luke. What about the children?" "We'll protect them," Ezra said firmly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "That's all there is to it." Back at the cabin, Ezra gathered everyone around the rough-hewn table for the evening meal. Steam rose from bowls of bean soup, as the children fidgeted in their seats, their eyes bright with hunger. "Bow your heads," Ezra said softly, surprising himself. He hadn't led prayer since his mama passed. "Lord, we thank you for this food and for bringing these little ones to our care. Watch over us all and help us know right from wrong. Amen." "Amen," the widows echoed, while the children peeked through their fingers at one another. Night fell early, as it always did in winter. Ezra had just banked the fire when movement caught his eye through the window. A shadow, darker than the rest, sliding between the trees at the edge of his property. "Stay inside," he told the widows, reaching for his Winchester. The rifle's weight was familiar in his hands as he stepped onto the porch. The shadow moved again. Ezra raised the rifle and fired once into the air, the report cracking across the silent landscape. "That's some welcome for a father coming to see his boys," a voice called from the darkness. The speaker stepped forward, moonlight revealing a tall man with a week's growth of beard. His gun belt hung low, and his eyes glinted with something between amusement and malice. "Luke Carver," Ezra said, keeping his rifle steady. "The same." Luke's boots crunched in the snow as he took another step forward. "Stand aside, mountain man. I've come for my sons." "They're safe here," Ezra replied, his voice quiet but firm. Luke's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "Safe? With some green hand? Who's barely off his mama's apron strings?" "Those are my boys in there. My blood." Behind Ezra, the cabin door opened. Martha, Clara, and Ruth filed out, forming a line across the porch. Inside, he could hear the children crying softly. "You lost any right to them when you chose the outlaw's path," Martha declared, her voice steady despite her fear. Luke's hand drifted toward his holster. "A man's got a right to his own flesh and blood. A man's got a duty to his children," Ezra countered, "to give them a proper home, not a life of running." "You think you can be their father?" Luke sneered. "Some lonely trapper who don't know the first thing about raising boys." Inside the cabin, Thomas called out, "Pa, is that really you?" Luke's face softened for just a moment. "I'm here, son." "Come on out to your pa." "They're staying put," Ezra said, his finger steady on the trigger guard. "I won't let you drag them into your troubles." The outlaw's eyes hardened again. "This ain't over, mountain man. I'll be back for what's mine." He began backing toward the tree line. "You hear me, boys? Your pa's coming for you." The children's sobs grew louder as Luke disappeared into the darkness. Jacob and Thomas clung to each other, torn between the father they remembered and the man who now protected them. Ezra lowered his rifle slowly, his heart aching for the boys. He knelt beside them, gathering them close as they wept. "Lord," he whispered, "give us wisdom. Show us how to protect these little ones without hardening their hearts." "He won't take them," Clara declared, her voice fierce with maternal protection. "We'll die before we let him drag those children into his criminal life." Martha and Ruth nodded grimly, while outside, the wind carried away the sound of Luke's retreating footsteps. The children's tears gradually quieted, but Ezra knew their confusion and pain would not fade so easily. Silver Bluff buzzed with whispers like angry bees in a hive. Ezra felt the stares as he led his wagon through town. The children huddled close beside him. Outside the mercantile, two men stepped apart to let him pass, their faces tight with judgment. "Bringing trouble on us all," one muttered, just loud. Enough to hear Sheriff Wilson caught Ezra's sleeve as he loaded supplies. "Think hard on what you're risking, Holly. Railroad's got long arms, and Luke Carver ain't the type to fade away quiet-like." "Can't abandon them now," Ezra replied, his voice low but firm. Back at the cabin, he found purpose in teaching the children. They gathered kindling in the crisp morning air, their small hands learning to sort dry wood from wet. Jacob, the eldest, at 10 years old, proved especially keen at checking the rabbit snares Ezra showed them how to set. Like this? Jacob asked, carefully bending a sapling. That's right, Ezra nodded, something warm spreading in his chest at the boy's proud smile. The evenings, they gathered around the fireplace, its glow casting dancing shadows on log walls. Ezra taught them the 23rd Psalm, their young voices joining his rough one. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It was during these quiet times that the widows began sharing their stories. Martha spoke first, her hands busy with mending, as she described the night a mob attacked her husband for defending Mexican farmers' water rights. They called it justice, she said bitterly, but there ain't nothing just about 5 men against one. Clara's tale spilled out like water from a broken dam. My Emma was only 6 months old when the fever took her, she whispered, tears catching firelight. Sometimes I still wake thinking I hear her cry. Ruth's story came slowly, like shy deer, emerging from forest shadows. My father's people were Cherokee, she explained, her fingers working a piece of beadwork. When I married Thomas, both sides turned away, said we'd cursed ourselves by mixing blood. She touched the silver cross at her throat. But love ain't about bloodlines. Ezra listened, saying little, but feeling each word settle deep in his soul. These women had faced darkness, yet kept their faith burning. Like cabin lanterns in a storm, the children thrived under their shared care. One bright morning, Ezra found an old sled in his barn and took them to the hill behind the cabin. Their laughter rang across the snow-covered valley as they slid down the slope, cheeks red with cold and joy. Again, little Sarah squealed, tugging at his coat sleeve. Please, Mr. Ezra. He couldn't help smiling, remembering his own childhood adventures in these same hills. Even the widows joined in, Martha's stern face softening as she helped push the sled dod, but their joy froze when they returned to find a piece of paper nailed to the cabin door. Ezra tore it down before the children could see, but the words burned. In his mind, blood calls blood. Return, my sons. That evening, after the children were asleep, the adults gathered at the table. Ruth's hands trembled as she poured coffee into tin cups. It ain't just Luke we're fighting, Martha said grimly. Railroads got plans for this valley. They'll use any excuse to drive folks out. Clara nodded. Heard tell they're pressing folks to sell grazing rights for pennies. Those who refuse find their barns burning. Agent Morton's behind it all, Ruth added. He's the one who framed Luke for that shooting 2 years back. Now he's using Luke's reputation to frighten people into selling. Ezra stared into his coffee, seeing the threads of greed and power weaving through their troubles like a poisonous vine. The railroad wanted land, Luke wanted his sons, and caught between them were 6 innocent children who just wanted a home. We can't give up, he said finally, looking at each woman in turn. These young ones deserve better than running scared or bowing to threats. Martha reached across the table and gripped his hand. Then we stand together. All of us, like family. Clara added softly. Ruth's dark eyes met his. The good book says perfect love casts out fear. Maybe that's what we're called to do here. Ezra nodded, feeling the weight of their trust settle on his shoulders like a warm blanket. Outside, snow began falling again, covering Luke's footprints, and the spot where the threatening note had been nailed. But Ezra knew both dangers, outlaw and railroad, were still out there, circling like wolves around their fragile peace. The Sunday morning dawned bright and cold as Ezra hitched the wagon. The children, scrubbed clean and wearing their best, climbed aboard with excited chatter. Ruth helped little Sarah tie her bonnet while Clara smoothed Tommy's cowlick one last time. Ready? Ezra asked, offering his hand to help Martha up onto the seat. The church bell rang across the valley as they approached, its clear tone drawing folks from all directions. Ezra felt uncertain, remembering his first awkward Sunday just weeks ago. But the children's presence gave him purpose now. and the widow's quiet strength steadied him. Inside, sunlight streamed through frosted windows, casting rainbow patterns on rough wooden pews. The children settled between the women, leaving space for Ezra at the end. He sat stiffly, aware of curious glances but determined to show these little ones the importance of faith. Preacher Andrews stepped to his pulpit, his weathered face kind as he surveyed his congregation. His sermon text came from James. Pure religion and undefiled before God is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. Ezra felt the words pierce his heart. The preacher spoke of community, of bearing one another's burdens, of God's special care for those left alone. When he described how Jesus himself had been raised by a widowed mother, Sarah reached for Ezra's hand. After service, something remarkable happened. Mrs. Peterson approached with a basket of fresh bread. "For the children," she said simply. Then, old Tom Wheeler brought woolen blankets his wife had woven. One by one, townspeople came forward with offerings. Jars of preserves, warm mittens, even a slate for teaching letters. "Reckon we were wrong to doubt," Wheeler admitted gruffly. "You're doing right by these young ones, Holly." That afternoon, Ezra spread paper on his rough table, sketching plans for the cabin expansion. His pencil moved carefully, mapping where roof beams would rise to support a sleeping loft. "See here," he explained to Jacob, who watched intently. "We'll put stairs along this wall, make room proper-like for everyone." Ruth appeared at his shoulder, studying the drawing. "You have a good eye for building," she said softly. Her presence warmed the air between them. Later that evening, as the children played quiet games by the fire, Ruth noticed Ezra struggling with a torn sleeve. "Here," she said, taking the garment. "Let me show you." Her fingers demonstrated the neat stitches needed. When Ezra tried to copy her movement, their hands brushed. Both pulled back quickly, color rising in their cheeks. "Much obliged," Ezra mumbled, focusing hard on his clumsy attempts to sew. The next weekend brought perfect weather for a picnic. Ezra hauled the old sled from the barn, while the women packed baskets with cornbread and apple pies. They found a gentle slope where sunshine had softened the snow just right. "Watch this!" Tommy shouted, launching himself downhill. His whoops of joy echoed across the valley. Even the adults took turns, Clara shrieking with delight as Martha steered them between pine trees. Ezra found himself laughing out loud, a sound foreign to his own ears, but warming his chest. They spread quilts on a sunny patch for lunch, sharing food and teaching the children hymns. Ruth's clear voice led amazing grace while Sarah tried to harmonize. Ezra watched them all, his family now, though he scarcely dared think the word, and felt more peace than he had known in years. But peace proved fragile as spring ice. As they loaded the wagon for home, hoofbeats approached. 3 men in city clothes rode up, railroad agent Morton at their head. Behind them came Sheriff Boone, his face grave. "Ezra Halley," Morton announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Sheriff has something for you." Boone dismounted slowly, reluctance clear in every movement. He pulled a paper from his vest. "Got no choice in this, Holly. It is a proper warrant." Ezra took the document, though his hands wanted to shake. The legal words blurred together, but their meaning was clear enough. He stood accused of harboring known outlaws and their kin. "This is nonsense," Martha declared, stepping forward. "These children ain't outlaws." Morton's smile didn't reach. His eyes, Luke Carver's blood kin unnamed specifically. "Law's the law." "The law can be twisted," Ruth said quietly, her dark eyes fierce. "Like you twisted it against their father." The agent's face hardened. "Watch your accusations, woman. Plenty of room on that warrant for more names." Ezra moved between Morton and the widows. "We'll answer this proper. Through the courts," he said. keeping his voice steady for the children's sake. But inside, fear coiled like a rattler. The railroad had money for fancy lawyers, and frontier justice often favored power over truth. The children huddled close as the riders departed, Sarah clutching Ezra's coat. The warrant felt heavy in his pocket, weighted with threats to everything they had built together. The next morning, Ezra trudged through fresh snow toward Silver Bluff's general store. He needed supplies, coffee, sugar, and medicine for the children's winter coughs. Sheriff Boone stepped from the shadows between buildings, his badge catching weak sunlight. "Allez," the lawman said quietly. "Need words with you." They moved to the alley shelter, away from prying eyes. Boone removed his hat, turning it in weathered hands. His face showed the strain of sleepless nights. "That warrant ain't just paper." "Son," Boone said, "railroad's calling you criminal if those children stay under your roof. Could mean prison." Ezra leaned against rough boards, feeling their cold through his coat. "You know it ain't right, Sheriff." "Right don't always match with law." Boone's eyes were troubled. "I've watched you with those young ones. Seen how they've thrived. But Morton's got the judge's ear, and Luke Carver's reputation taints everything. Give me time," Ezra pleaded. "Truth's gotta count for something. Those children need protection. Not railroad schemes. Truth," Boone snorted. "Railroad men don't care about truth. They want Carver's land claims dead and buried." He settled his hat back on gray hair. "I'll stall best I can, but prepare yourself. Storm's coming, and I don't just mean snow." As if summoned by his words, heavy flakes began falling. By afternoon, the storm howled around Ezra's cabin like a hungry wolf. Inside, Tommy's cough grew worse with each passing hour. "He's burning up," Clara whispered, touching the boy's flushed face. Ezra rushed to fill the iron kettle, setting it to boil on the cookstove. Ruth tore clean cloth into strips while Martha mixed honey with whiskey, an old remedy for chest congestion. Tommy thrashed on his narrow bed, dark hair plastered to his forehead. His breathing came in painful gasps that tore at Ezra's heart. "Lord, please," Martha prayed, her voice cracking. "Spare this child." They worked through the endless night. Ezra changed cold compresses whenever they grew warm, speaking soft encouragement. Clara sang lullabies between prayers. Ruth brewed willow bark tea, coaxing Tommy to sip. The other children huddled together, watching with wide eyes as Sarah whispered, "Will Tommy die like Pa?" "No," Ezra said firmly, though fear clutched his chest. "We won't let that happen." Hour after hour, they fought the fever. Ezra's arms ached from carrying water, his back stiff from bending over the sick bed. The women took turns resting, but he couldn't stop. Every rattling breath Tommy drew seemed to depend on their constant care. Near dawn, the boy's eyes fluttered open, clearer than before. "Mr. Holler?" he whispered. Ezra knelt beside him. "I'm here, son." Tommy's thin fingers clutched his sleeve. "Don't let Pa take me." Tears slid from the corners of his eyes. "He hits when he drinks. Please don't make us go." "Never," Ezra promised, his throat tight. "You're safe here." "I swear it." The boy's grip relaxed as he drifted into natural sleep. His breathing eased, the fever breaking at last. Martha pressed a damp cloth to her eyes while Clara whispered thanks. To heaven, in the gray light of morning, Ruth touched Ezra's shoulder. "You need rest." He shook his head, moving to check the stove fire, but her hand stayed firm. "You can't protect them if you fall ill yourself," she said softly. "Let us watch a spell." Before he could argue, a sound caught his attention. Hoofbeats muffled by snow moving away from the cabin. Ezra grabbed his rifle and rushed to the door, but only tracks remained, already filling with fresh snow. "Luke," Martha said grimly. "He's been watching." Ezra stared at the disappearing trail, his promise to Tommy heavy in his mind. The outlaw father had seen their vigil through the windows, witnessed their care for his son. Yet he'd ridden away without showing himself. Maybe even Luke knows where the boys are better off, Clara suggested, but Ezra wasn't so sure. A man's pride could drive him to terrible choices. He'd seen that truth play out too often in these mountains. He barred the door against the storm and returned to Tommy's bedside, determined to keep his word. The boy slept peacefully now, his fever broken, but Ezra's troubles were far from over. The warrant still waited, and the railroad wouldn't rest until they had what they wanted. He settled into his chair, rifle across his knees, and watched the snowfall. Ruth brought him coffee, her hand lingering on his shoulder. Together they listened to the children's quiet breathing, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. Snow pelted Ezra's face as he saddled his horse before dawn. The beast stamped nervously, steam rising from its nostrils in the bitter cold. Inside the cabin, Tommy's cough echoed through the thin walls. "We'll watch things here," Martha assured him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Just hurry back with Dr. Wilson." Clara pressed a flask of hot coffee into his coat pocket. "The trail to town will be treacherous. Be careful." Ezra mounted up, adjusting his scarf against the wind. Ruth stood in the doorway, worry etched on her face as she cradled Tommy's younger sister. "God go with you," she whispered. The first mile proved brutal. Ice coated every branch, and his horse picked its way carefully through deepening drifts. Wind howled through the passes, driving needles of sleet into his eyes. Twice, he had to dismount and lead his mount around patches of dangerous ground, where ice gleamed beneath the powder. A branch whipped across his cheek, drawing blood. Ezra barely noticed. His thoughts stayed fixed on Tommy's labored breathing, spurring him forward despite the elements. The usually 2-hour ride stretched endlessly as he fought the weather. Near the valley floor, ice crackled ominously under his horse's hooves. The animal snorted in alarm, dancing sideways. Ezra spoke soothingly, guiding them onto firmer ground. One wrong step here could mean a broken leg, or worse. Silver Bluff finally emerged through the swirling snow near midday. Ezra rode straight to Dr. Wilson's house, pounding on the door with numb fingers. The elderly physician took one look at Ezra's ice-crusted form and began packing his medical bag. "Pneumonia, you say? In this weather?" He shook his head, but moved quickly, gathering bottles and instruments. "The boy's fever's dangerous high," Ezra explained, stamping his feet to restore feeling. "Been fighting it all night." "Well, let's not waste time then." The doctor pulled on his heaviest coat. "My horse is fresh. We'll make better time with him pulling the sleigh." The return journey, though still harsh, went faster with the doctor's strong horse breaking trail. They reached the cabin as dusk painted the snow purple and gold. Inside, Tommy lay pale but alert, managed a weak smile at seeing Ezra. Dr. Wilson worked efficiently, listening to the boy's chest and mixing medicines from his bag. "You did right bringing me," he said quietly. Another day without proper treatment. He left the thought unfinished. The physician stayed through the night, showing them how to administer the medicine and use steam to ease Tommy's breathing. By morning, the worst had passed. The boy's fever broke, and his cough grew looser, less desperate. Ezra slumped in his chair, exhaustion finally claiming him as sunlight crept through frosted windows. The widows moved quietly around him, preparing breakfast while the other children slept. His whispered prayer of thanks was interrupted by boots on the porch. Sheriff Boone entered, shaking snow from his hat. His expression was grave. Ezra, railroads, made their move. The sheriff pulled crumpled telegrams from his coat. These came last night from headquarters. They're demanding immediate action on that warrant. Say you're interfering with company law by harboring these children. Ezra straightened, despite his weariness. What company law? They've no right to these young ones. They're claiming Luke Carver's land dispute makes his children ward of the railroad's interests. Boone's disgust was plain. Judge Harrison set a hearing for next week. I'm sorry, son. My hands are tied. Dr. Wilson, who had been listening while packing his bag, spoke up. This is nonsense, Sheriff. I'll testify myself how well these children are cared for here. Much obliged, Doc, Ezra said quietly. But railroad men don't care about care. They want control. Control. The sheriff nodded grimly. Morton's behind this. He aims to pressure Luke through his boys. He hesitated. Speaking of which, there's been reports of a rider watching the cabin. You need to be ready. Luke might not wait for any trial. Ezra glanced at Tommy, sleeping peacefully now. The other children were stirring, their morning chatter mixing with breakfast sounds as the widows worked. This makeshift family had become everything to him. He wouldn't let either railroad greed or an outlaw's pride destroy it. I'll be at the hearing, he told Boone. But these children stay safe with me until then, no matter what. The sheriff touched his hat brim. Watch your back, Ezra. Morton's got the law twisted up, but Luke, he's got nothing left to lose. After Boone left, Ruth brought Ezra a plate of eggs and biscuits. You need strength, she said softly, for whatever comes. He managed a tired smile, warmed by her concern. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world glazed in ice and silence. But Ezra knew the real storm was just beginning. Morning frost coated the windows of silver. Bluff's town hall as Sheriff Boone led Ezra up the wooden steps. Iron chains clinked between Ezra's wrists, drawing gasps from gathered townsfolk. They, widows huddled together near the entrance, their breath visible in the winter air. Martha held Tommy, still pale from his illness, while Clara and Ruth gripped the other children's shoulders. Stay strong, Ezra murmured as he passed them. Young William reached out to touch his sleeve, but a deputy gently pulled the boy back. Inside, the hall oil lamps cast flickering shadows across rough-hewn walls. Railroad agent Morton sat at a table near Judge Harrison, his leather portfolio arranged just so, his watch chain gleaming. Ezra noticed how the agent's manicured fingers drummed impatiently on the scarred tabletop. Sheriff Boone guided Ezra to a wooden chair before the judge's raised platform. The chains rattled as he sat, drawing every eye in the packed room. Preacher Collins stood near the back, his Bible clutched tight. Dr. Wilson had come straight from his rounds, medicine bag still in hand. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. This hearing will come to order. Agent Morton, present your case. Morton rose, smoothly, producing papers from his portfolio. Your Honor, Ezra Hollis stands accused of harboring the children of known outlaw Luke Carver, thereby aiding and abetting a criminal's interests. He placed documents before the judge. These records show Carver's outstanding warrants for murder and theft of railroad property. The children ain't property, Ezra said quietly, but firmly. Their souls in need. Mr. Halley, Judge Harrison warned, you'll have your turn. Morton continued, his voice oily. The railroad has legal claim to all assets connected to Carver's crimes, including guardianship of his offspring. We demand immediate custody. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ezra saw Ruth pull Tommy closer through the window, her dark eyes meeting his with fierce determination. Your Honor, Ezra spoke when called upon, rising despite his chains. I came to these children through God's guidance and the widow's trust. They were sick, hungry, and afraid. His voice strengthened. I've taught them psalms and proper chores, given them warm beds and full bellies. They laugh now, where before they only wept. Townspeople nodded. Someone called out, That's gospel truth. The law is clear, Morton interrupted. Sentiment cannot override. The doors crashed open with a bang that made women scream. Luke Carver stood in the entrance, snow swirling around his lean frame. His pistol gleamed as he swept it across the room. "Where are my boys?" He growled. Sheriff Boone drew his revolver, but Ezra shouted, "No! No more violence!" He stood, chains rattling. "Luke, your sons are safe. They're cared for. Don't destroy that with bloodshed." Luke took a step forward, then stumbled. His free hand clutched his chest as he began coughing deep, racking spasms that brought blood to his lips. The pistol clattered to the floor as he collapsed to his knees. "I never killed that railroad man," he gasped between coughs. "Morton framed me, wanted our grazing land, paid witnesses to lie." More blood speckled his chin. The room erupted in chaos. Dr. Wilson rushed forward as Luke slumped against a bench. Morton's face had gone pale, and he began edging toward a side door. "Stop him," Sheriff Boone commanded. 2 deputies blocked Morton's escape. "It's true," Luke wheezed as the doctor examined him. "Morton's men attacked me, shot me in the lung, left me for dead. But I survived, had to find my boys." Another coughing fit seized him. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Order. I want sworn statements now." "I'll swear it," Luke said weakly. "Before God and man. Morton arranged it all, to steal our water. Rights, our future." The crowd's anger turned toward Morton, who had begun to sweat. Sheriff Boone approached the agent, handcuffs ready. "Your Honor," Ezra spoke into the tension. "The truth's been buried, but not dead, like Luke himself. Seems to me there's more than one kind of justice needed here." The judge studied Morton's ashen face, then Luke's blood-stained one. "Indeed, Mr. Hawley. Indeed." He turned to the sheriff. "Remove Agent Morton's credentials. And these chains from Mr. Hawley. We'll be needing many more sworn testimonies before this day is done." As Boone unlocked Ezra's shackles, the widows and children rushed in from the cold. Tommy ran to Ezra while his brothers knelt beside their father, tears flowing freely. "Pa," William whispered, "we thought you were dead." Luke touched his son's face with a trembling hand. "Almost was, boy, almost was." He looked up at Ezra. "You did right by them. Better than I ever did." The townsfolk pressed closer, their silence heavy with the weight of justice long delayed, finally breaking free like spring thaw after the hardest winter. Dr. Wilson and Sheriff Boone lifted Luke carefully between them, his boots dragging, as they carried him from the town hall. Blood dotted the snow where they walked. A crowd followed at a respectful distance, their whispers rising like steam in the cold morning air. "Get my examining room ready," Dr. Wilson called to his wife, who hurried ahead to unlock the clinic door. Inside, they eased Luke onto a narrow bed. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, each breath bringing a wet rattle. Sheriff Boone removed his hat, turning it in his weathered hands. "I need that confession proper, Luke. Names, dates, everything you can remember." Fetch Jasper." "Turner," Luke wheezed. "He was there. Saw Morton's men attack me. Wouldn't testify. Before. Too scared." The sheriff nodded to a deputy, who mounted up and rode hard toward the Turner Ranch. More witnesses came forward as word spread. Ranch hands who'd seen Morton's men threatening homesteaders. A telegraph operator who'd intercepted suspicious messages. Even the bank clerk who'd processed irregular payments. "Dear Lord," Boone muttered, scribbling in his notebook. "This goes deeper than we thought." Outside the clinic, Ezra stood blinking in the bright snowlight, his wrists still bearing red marks from the chains. The widows rushed to him, Clara grabbing his arm while Ruth touched his shoulder. Martha held back, watching the children's faces. "Uncle Ezra." Tommy cried, breaking free to throw his arms around Ezra's waist. The other children followed, creating a tangle of tears and laughter and clutching hands. "Easy now," Ezra said softly, his own voice rough with emotion. He knelt in the snow to gather them closer. "I'm right here." Ain't going nowhere. Judge Harrison emerged from the town hall, his black robe sweeping the wooden sidewalk. Mr. Hawley, you're released to your own custody until this matter is fully settled. Sheriff Boone will check in regular-like. He paused, then added more quietly, you did right by these little ones. Don't forget that. The ride home to the cabin was subdued. Ezra drove the wagon while the widows huddled with the children under thick quilts. The runners cut smooth tracks through fresh snow. The only sound the soft jingle of harness bells and occasional sniffles from the children. Inside, Martha and Clara set about making supper while Ruth stoked the fire. Ezra sat in his chair by the hearth. The children gathered close around him on the floor. Their faces glowed in the firelight, full of questions they were afraid to ask. Reckon we need to talk about your pa, Ezra said gently. He picked up a stick and poked at the flames, gathering his thoughts. He's alive, like you saw today. But he's powerful sick from an old wound that never healed right. William, the oldest, pulled his knees to his chest. Is he still bad? Like they said? Ezra shook his head. Seems he was wrong, son. That railroad man Morton lied about him, tried to steal your land. Your pays was protecting what was rightfully yours. But he left us, Tommy whispered. He didn't come find us for so long. He was hurt bad, trying to survive. And maybe, Ezra chose his words carefully, maybe he wanted to clear his name first so you boys wouldn't have to carry that shame. Sarah, the youngest, crawled into Ezra's lap. Will he die now? The question hung heavy in the cabin. Even the widows paused in their work, waiting for his answer. That's in God's hands, little one, Ezra said softly. Dr. Wilson's doing all he can. Best we can do is pray. He bowed his head, and the children followed suit. Lord above, we come to you tonight with heavy hearts, but grateful ones too. Truth has come to light, but at a fearsome cost. We ask for mercy, for Luke who's suffering, for these children who've borne so much, for all who've been touched by this trouble. Guide the doctor's hands. Give wisdom to the judge. Help us find our way through this valley of shadows. As he prayed, Ezra felt hands settle on his shoulders, Martha first, then Clara and Ruth, joining their faith to his. The children's tears flowed freely now, but there was something cleansing in them, like spring rain washing winter away. And Lord, he finished, voice thick with emotion, whatever comes, help us remember we're family now. Not by blood, maybe, but by choice and by your grace. Amen. Amen, the others echoed softly. The children stayed close to Ezra that night, reluctant to leave his side even for bed. He told them stories until their eyes grew heavy, tales of David's courage, of Joseph's forgiveness, of God's faithful love. Through all trials, one by one they drifted off, their small bodies finally relaxing in sleep. The widows watched from the kitchen table, their eyes soft in the lamplight. You're a good father to them, Martha murmured. Whether Luke lives or dies, don't forget that. Ezra just nodded, his throat too tight for words. Outside, snow began falling again, covering the day's tracks with fresh white mercy. The morning sun cast long shadows through the clinic's windows as Ezra approached Luke's sickbed. Dr. Wilson had cleaned and dressed the wound, but fever still burned in Luke's eyes. His face was gray against the white pillow, lips cracked from thirst. Brought you some water, Ezra said quietly, helping Luke lift his head to drink. Much obliged. Luke's voice rasped like dry leaves. He studied Ezra's face for a long moment. Reckon we need to talk, you and me. Ezra pulled a chair closer, its wooden legs scraping across the floor. Outside, a wagon rattled past, but inside the clinic was quiet save for Luke's labored breathing. I ain't killed no one, Luke began, each word seeming to cost him. Done plenty wrong, stealing cattle when times got desperate, threatening folk who tried to run me off my land. But that shooting they accuse me of? He shook his head weakly. Morton's own men did that. I saw them do it. Then they framed me neat as you please. Why didn't you fight it in court? Ezra asked. Luke's laugh turned into a cough. With what money? Against railroad lawyers? I ran instead, thinking I could gather proof, come back stronger. His eyes grew distant. Never meant to leave my boys so long. Thought I was protecting them, keeping trouble far from their door. Tears gathered in the corners of Luke's eyes. But you, he reached out, gripping Ezra's sleeve with surprising strength. You did what I couldn't. Gave them a real home. Taught them right from wrong. They're good boys, Ezra said softly, strong-hearted. Listen close. Luke's voice grew. Urgent. If I don't make it through this, and don't sugarcoat it, we both know that's likely. I need your word. Promise you'll raise them proper. Keep them safe from Morton's sword. Ezra met Luke's fevered gaze. You have my word before God. They'll want for nothing I can provide. Luke's grip relaxed, relief washing over his features. You're a better man than me, Ezra Hawley. Reckon that's God's mercy, sending you to them. Across town, in Judge Harrison's office, different words were being spoken. Railroad Agent Morton stood before the judge's desk, his well-tailored suit a stark contrast to the simple furnishings. Consider your position carefully, Morton said smoothly, sliding an envelope across. The polished wood. The railroad remembers its friends. Judge Harrison's face hardened. He pushed the envelope back unopened. And I remember my oath to uphold the law, Mr. Morton. Good day to you. Word of Morton's attempted bribe spread quickly through Silver Bluff. By noon, Preacher Collins was moving door to door, gathering signatures on a petition to the territorial marshal. This ain't just about Ezra anymore, the preacher told each neighbor. It's about standing against corruption that would poison our whole territory. Back at Ezra's cabin, Clara sat at the rough-hewn table, an old hymnal open before her. The children gathered around, their faces bright with interest as she pointed to the words. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. She began, her clear voice lifting in the afternoon light. One by one, the children joined in, their young voices growing. More confident with each verse. Ezra paused in the doorway, wood basket in his arms, struck by the scene. Some light streamed through the window, catching dust motes and golden beams. The children's faces glowed with joy as they sang. Martha worked quietly at her mending, while Ruth stirred something fragrant on the stove. For the first time in years, the cabin felt truly like a home. The loneliness that had been his constant companion since his mother's death seemed to loosen its grip on his heart. Yet later that night, after the children were asleep, worry gnawed at him. He sat by the fire, Bible open in his lap, but his thoughts kept circling back to Luke's condition and Morton's threats. You're fretting again, Clara said softly, settling into the chair opposite him. I can see it in your face. If Luke dies, Ezra spoke quietly, Morton might come at us harder. Man like that, with money and spite behind him. He trailed off, staring into the flames. The Lord didn't bring us this far to abandon us now, Clara reminded him. Her hand found his across the space between them, warm and steady. And you're not alone anymore. Ezra nodded, drawing strength from her touch and faith. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney like prayers into the night sky. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, but for now, there was peace in belonging Dot in the loft above. The children slept soundly, their breathing soft and even. Ezra could just make out the hymn book Clara had left on the table, its pages still open to amazing grace. The words seemed to whisper in the firelight. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. Winter's icy grip tightened around Silver Bluff as January deepened. Inside Ezra's cabin, Martha counted there, dwindling supplies with worried eyes. The potato bin held barely enough for 2 more weeks, and the salt pork was running low. Even with careful rationing, feeding 3 growing boys and the rest of their makeshift family stretched their stores thin. "We need to trade some furs in town," Ezra announced one crisp morning, studying the pile of beaver and rabbit pelts he'd collected. "Might fetch enough for flour and beans at least." Ruth stepped forward, wrapping a worn shawl around her shoulders. "I'll come with you. 2 can carry more back." They hitched up the wagon, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The children waved from the doorway as Ezra and Ruth set out, the wagon's wheels crunching through crusty snow. Ruth sat close beside him on the seat, sharing warmth against the biting wind. "You've done more for us than we could have hoped," Ruth said softly as they rode. "When we prayed for help, for someone to protect the children," she paused, tucking a loose strand of dark hair beneath her hood. "Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways." Ezra's cheeks colored, and not just from the cold. "Reckon I'm not what anyone expected." "No," Ruth agreed with a gentle smile. "You're better." The streets of Silver Bluff were quiet when they arrived, most folks staying indoors against the bitter weather. Ezra helped Ruth down from the wagon, then gathered an armload of furs. They headed toward Thompson's general store, but 3 railroad men blocked their path. "Well, if it ain't the outlaw's friend," the tallest one sneered, tobacco juice staining his beard. His companions spread out, hands resting on their gun belts. Ezra stepped slightly in front of Ruth. "We're just here to trade." "Might not have a cabin to go back to," the man continued, eyes cold. "Accidents happen in winter. Lanterns tip over, sparks catch." Ezra's hand twitched toward his revolver. The threat to his home, to the children, made his blood run hot. But Ruth's soft touch on his arm steadied him. "The good book says to overcome evil with good," Ezra said evenly, though his heart hammered. "I aim to live by that." "Hiding behind Scripture now?" The railroad man spat in the snow. "No, sir." Stamping on it, Ezra met the man's gaze without flinching. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got trading to do." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Sheriff Boone's voice rang out from the jail porch. "Everything all right here, folks?" The railroad men backed away, muttering threats, but the danger passed. Ezra released a shaky breath, realizing his hands were trembling. "That took courage," Ruth whispered as they entered the store. "Most men would have drawn iron." "Violence begets violence," Ezra replied quietly. "I've seen enough of that in the mountains." They traded their furs for supplies, careful to choose items that would stretch furthest. As they loaded the wagon, familiar faces appeared, townsfolk bearing baskets and sacks. "Thought you might need some extra," Preacher Collins said, setting down a bag of cornmeal. "Church ladies been baking all morning." More neighbors arrived, bringing what they could spare, jars of preserves, smoked venison, even warm quilts. Ezra stood amazed at their generosity. "We take care of our own," the blacksmith's wife declared, adding a sack of dried apples to the wagon. "And you're one of us now, Ezra Holly." That evening, as they unloaded the bounty at home, Clara and Martha shared knowing looks. "We should tell him," Martha said softly. Clara nodded. "About our prayers?" Ruth touched Ezra's arm, drawing his attention. "When we first came to Silver Bluff, we were desperate. 3 widows with children, no means to provide. We prayed every night for God to send someone, a guardian angel, we said. Never thought he'd send a mountain man," Clara added with a warm smile. "But here you are, protecting us better than we dreamed possible." Ezra ducked his head, uncomfortable with their praise. "I'm no angel, just trying to do what's right." "That's exactly why you were the answer to our prayers," Martha said firmly. As they stored the supplies. Word arrived via the telegraph office. the territorial marshal would reach Silver Bluff within the week to investigate the railroad's dealings and Luke's claims. Ezra stood at his cabin door that night, watching stars pierce the velvet sky. He felt unworthy of the widow's faith in him, yet deeply grateful for this unexpected family. His quiet prayer of thanks rose with the smoke from his chimney, carrying hopes for justice and continued strength to choose mercy over vengeance. The children's peaceful breathing drifted down from the loft, while the widow softly sang hymns around the fire. Outside, snow began falling again, but inside, warmth and love kept winter's chill at bay. The territorial marshal swept into Silver Bluff like a winter storm, his long coat dusted with snow. Inside the crowded town hall, he questioned each witness, in turn, his keen eyes missing nothing. Ezra stood tall before him, speaking plainly of the children's needs and his duty to protect them. "I found my purpose in caring for these little ones," Ezra said, his voice steady. "They needed shelter, and I had a warm hearth to share." The widows testified next, their stories of loss and hope bringing tears to many eyes. Martha spoke of Ezra's gentle guidance with the children, Clara of his tireless work to feed them all, and Ruth of his choice to show mercy rather than violence. Luke Carver, pale but alert in his wheelchair, revealed the truth about the railroad schemes. His trembling hands held documents, letters and contracts that proved Agent Morton had framed him to seize grazing lands. The marshal's face darkened as he read each paper. "This evidence shows clear fraud," the marshal declared. "Agent Morton and his conspirators will face federal charges." The judge rose solemnly. "In light of these findings, I hereby grant Ezra Hawley and the widows their land claims under homestead law. Furthermore, they shall receive additional protection under territorial statute." Luke caught Ezra's eye from across the room. When the marshal offered him leniency in exchange for testimony against the railroad, Luke nodded weakly. "I'll tell everything I know," he whispered, reaching for Ezra's hand. Their grip sealed more than just a legal victory. It marked the end of their bitter conflict and the beginning of peace. Springtime brought new life to the mountain valley. Melting snow fed crystal streams that wound through fresh grass, turning the land emerald green. Outside Ezra's expanded cabin, the morning sun caught droplets hanging from the new pine eaves of the raised loft. Chickens scratched in the warming earth, their soft clucks mixing with children's laughter. 6 young ones chased each other in a spirited game of tag, their boots kicking up tufts of grass. Their voices echoed off the mountainsides, no longer hollow with hunger, but full of joy. Neighbors from Silver Bluff hefted shovels and posts, working together to fence a plot for the spring garden. The sound of hammering filled the air as rails took shape, marking the boundaries of their growing homestead. Martha and Clara spread seed in freshly turned soil while Ruth tended the cook fire, steam rising from the iron pot. The preacher raised his weathered hands over the land, his voice carrying clear in the mountain air. "Lord, bless this ground and these thy children who work it. Let their harvest be bountiful, their hearts be glad, and their bonds grow ever stronger." Ezra bowed his head, his throat tight with emotion. The setting sun painted the mountain peaks in shades of gold and purple, a sight he'd watched alone. So many years. Now the beauty seemed doubled, reflected in the faces of those around him. "We asked you to give each of us one child," Martha whispered, touching his arm. "But you gave us more. You gave us family." Ezra nodded, unable to speak. The lonely mountain man who once fled from all connection now stood surrounded by love. Faith had led him to become father and brother to these precious souls, bound together by mercy and second chances. His heart swelled with gratitude for this gift of belonging. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.